Coming up today, we're going to get our corn planted. We've worked hard to get the bed ready to go. And should you add worms to your container garden? We'll discuss all of that, the pros and cons, all that and more, coming up today on the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener. The Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener is sponsored in part by, for all your non-GMO, heirloom, organic, vegetable, flowers, and herb seeds, visit dollarseed.com. Sioux Growing Supply, located in Wausau, Wisconsin, focusing on certified leaf compost, an excellent amendment for poor soil, retains moisture and adds nutrients, which equals less watering. Available in Sioux organic seed starting kits, pre-filled trays and pots, bag and bulk. Visit SiouxCompost.com. Organic fertilizer for the health-conscious organic home gardener. Family owned and operated. Visit wgardens.com. Don't poison your soil with municipal water. Attach a body, mind, and soil hose and filter. Free shipping exclusively through the WisconsinVegetableGardener.com. Just click on the body, mind, and soil icon. Authentic Haven brand soil conditioner for the home gardener. Easy to brew, 100% organic. Visit MinerT.com. Welcome to the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener. I'm Joy Baird. We're in the large garden today, and it's time to get our sweet corn planted. Now, if you've followed us very much on the video series here, you know that we're not and have not had very much success growing sweet corn for a variety of different reasons. So what we have attempted to do is we decided last fall that this bed here, this 45 square foot bed, was going to be the designated growing space for sweet corn come this year. So last year, in addition to this spring, we've put about 80 pounds of used coffee grounds on the bed. And last year, we also mulched this bed extremely heavy with leaves. At this point, we've removed the leaves back. We've weeded any unnecessary weeds that were in the bed. We applied some fertilizer from Winchester Gardens. Now, what we did here was to put as much nutrients in the soil as we possibly could. This is not something that you would necessarily have to do based on your soil, your growing conditions. But what we did, we combined 4 different varieties of fertilizer, blood meal, bone meal, some 755, and some potato fertilizer. We mathematically calculated the applicational rates combined with what 45 square feet would be needed, and we dispersed it on the bed here. So what the end result is on that MPK is approximately, give or take a few numbers, a 31, 17, 14 in that range. We know the nitrogen is going to be in the upper 20s. The potassium and phosphates are going to be in the mid-teens. Now this may be very excessive, but this is what we're going to do. This is an experimental bed. We're going to figure out how to grow sweet corn one way or another. In addition to the 80 pounds of compost, we also included 6 square feet of certified leaf compost last year. In addition, we're going to add another 3 cubic feet approximately on this bed and work it and just smooth it around, level it out. So what the intent is, I need my rake, is last year in this bed we had leeks that we had moved over because we didn't have a good stand-up. And on this side of the bed we had grown corn. Now the corn was not terrible in structure and stalk-wise. The ears were small and we didn't really get any ears at all. Now one is the number of plants we had. We didn't have a very large block. You want to have a tremendous amount of plants so the tassels can pollinate the hairs on the ear. So what we have done, and the consensus between Holly and myself, is we're going to add as much nutrients to the soil as possible. So if we have stalks that are 12 feet tall, the chances are, and we're going to make sure we get good pollination, the stronger the stalk, or any plant, the stronger the plant, the better results the fruit production will be. So that's the consensus behind that we're going to, one way or another, get very large and very healthy corn stalks, ears, and kernels on that ear, on those ears, will be determined. So just going to spread this out. We've added so much nutrients to this bed. What we're planting is Silver King hybrid corn, just in regular, ordinary, non-GMO corn. We're going to do it on 12-inch rows, and the spacing of the kernels is going to be 9 inches. Now in big ag industry, your spacing on your row, the planter, is somewhere between 16 and 24 inches, somewhere in that range. I'm not quite remember quite correctly, but I do know the spacing on the seeds are between 7 and 9 inches. So we're going to go 9 inches in this bed. That's going to give us 10 rows, 9 inches. The bed's about 4.5 foot wide. We're going to get somewhere between about 60 kernels or 60 stalks of corn, give or take a few. So we're just going to start, and I'm not going to mark, I'm not going to put little row markers where each one of these rows is going to be. But what I will do is I'm going to come off the edge here and start right here. Now corn wants to be planted, or likes to be planted, in two key elements. Corn needs to be planted in soil that is between 50 and 60 degrees minimal temperature. Ideally 55 degrees, 2 inches down, and 6 inches down at 50 degrees. This soil that we're working with now is approximately 55 to 63 degrees based on the different locations that we tested. So we're safe on that. If it's too cold, the corn kernels will just rot in the soil. You can pre-soak these kernels as well to accelerate the planting. Now last year we started these in containers and transplanted them out. We feel it's just going to be easier to direct sow them. You also want to plant these about 1.5 inches deep is where you want to go with your corn plantings. So we're going to go 9 inch, got our measuring block here, going to go 9 inches. And it's very easy to do. Nothing too scientific about it. The only advantage that you would have in pre-starting your seeds in containers would be you would know every seed when it came up, you know it was good. With this particular direct sowing, just like anything, we're not certain if all of these seeds are going to germinate, and these will take about 7 to 14 days to mature. So I'm going to go ahead and get all these planted, and then we will come back and cover them up and get them watered in and finish the procedure here of getting our sweet corn bed planted, in the hopes that what we have done, the preparations we have prepared this bed, that we're going to have a different result than we have in years past. All right, so I ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows at 6 seeds per row, which is 48. So that's not bad, with a spacing of 1 foot centers, 1 foot between each row. So now I'm just going to cover them gently over. Soil is very, very moist, so I'm not going to water these seeds any more than what they already are. But what I will do is take the leaves that we had pulled off the bed and just throw them beside the rows that I planted, just to hold the moisture in. And then once the seedlings have emerged, we can bring some grass clippings in. We can also bring some leaves that we still have stored up, shredded leaves, bring in and mulch this in to hold that moisture, retain that moisture. The weeds, we really haven't had an issue. We mulched it heavy last year like I spoke about, and that really held the weeds down. But since we've agitated the soil, that's going to introduce some seeds to the light. So we'll have to deal with that very minimal amount, and we'll mulch this in real heavy. So again, 55 degrees to 60 degrees, really ideal temperature for consistent temperature for corn. You can get it down 55 degrees at 2 inches, 50 degrees at 6 inches. Corn usually will take, based on your variety, 60 to 95 days. So keep that in mind, and you want to plant it in a block, not a single row. You want to have multiple rows so the tassels pollinate the ears, that the hairs, the follicle hairs on the ears, each one of those is associated with a kernel that will form if it's pollinated. Growing in containers is a great option whether you have ground to grow in or not. We're going to plant some potatoes, and we're doing it in two different methods. One is a traditional 15-gallon grow bag courtesy of rootmaker.com, and then also just a burlap sack that we got from our local coffee roaster. Now, a couple of things you want to keep in mind. One, containers will dry out quicker based on the material you have in it. The less amount of material you have, the quicker the soil will dry out. So, just like we have on our artichokes over here, we've got mulch and straw and dry leaves to help retain the moisture in it. Potato planting in a container is very similar to potato planting in the ground. One thing that we do different than others is a lot of people will plant the potato. We're using two varieties here from Wood Prairie Farms. We're going to take, and I'll explain the difference here. A lot of people will put a little bit of soil in the bottom, plant their potato, cover the potato, and once the potato begins to grow, they'll continue to hill it up or add more soil. Well, we have found that that doesn't really encourage additional potatoes. The potato's already determined how much potatoes it's going to produce. So by keep backfilling, it's not like a tomato where it'll just continue to put roots on it and extend exponentially and continue to put potatoes on. So we're just going to take, and this 15-gallon here, we're going to put three potatoes that have sprouted in it, and in the burlap sack here, we're just going to take, and I'm going to feel safe to put two. Now the burlap sack, if you grow in a burlap sack or you want to grow in a burlap sack, the key is to find sacks that are tightly woven. That's going to greatly reduce the amount of air that's going to get into the soil and dry it out. If you find some that are relatively woven tight, you can double them up, so that will also work. So with the potatoes planting here, we're going to plant the potato. I'm going to go four inches deep, and then I'm going to put a little potato fertilizer in each hole. Plant them 4 inches deep, and I'm just going to cover them up, and then as they sprout, that's just going to be the way it's going to be. It's going to be a low maintenance planting here. We got good compost. Plant the potato. And then what we'll do is we'll come back in here with some mulch and cover it up. And in the burlap sack, same thing. We're just going to dig a hole, add some fertilizer, potato fertilizer, plant it, dig the hole, add potato fertilizer, cover them up, and it's that easy. And this will work great whether you have ground to grow in or not. Even if you have ground and you have mobility issues, or you just don't like that treasure hunt that you have to go through when harvesting potatoes, you can just simply take and dump this over on a tarp, find your potatoes very easily. Most potatoes, based on the variety, will mature between 50 and 135 days. They fall into categories just like tomatoes. There are early, mid, and late maturity variety potatoes. Growing in containers, growing potatoes in containers can just be another addition to your container and ground garden. Garbanzo beans or chickpeas can be grown in your vegetable garden. They are a cool season, cool weather crop that takes 100 days to reach maturity. Ideal temperatures are 70 to 80 degree days with nights not dipping below 65. These want to be planted 1 to 2 inches deep and rows 18 to 24 inches apart. The important thing to know about planting chickpeas is you want to have a good, fertile, full sun location. We've added some compost to our bed. You don't want to add a high nitrogen level fertilizer. Chickpeas are actually part of the legume or bean family. They will affix the nitrogen that they need. You don't want to pre-soak your chickpeas before planting them. That can cause them to crack and then fail at germination. You also want to note that chickpeas are extremely intolerable to root disturbance. So if you do decide to start these, which can be planted outside 2 to 3 weeks before your last average frost date, you want to start them in a biodegradable pot and do not disturb the roots at the time of planting. Planting them 3 to 6 inches apart is the recommended space that's required. Then you can also thin them down to every 6 inches, but at the time of thinning, you don't want to pull the plant out, just simply trim it off at ground level. Again, disturbance of the roots is one of the fidgety things about garbanzo beans or chickpeas. So if you've never grown these, this may be a plant that you might want to consider to grow in your garden or your container garden. So the question is, should you add worms, earthworms that you get out of your garden in your container garden containers here? Well, you would think that would be a good idea to do such because they would eat the organic material in there and release worm castings and aerate the soil. True enough. But the downside to adding worms to your container is, one, the container size. This is a 15-gallon grow bag, and even at that size, it would not be adequate space for worm or worm colony. The reason being is, when we add soil to a container, we're adding a good compost base to begin with. It's not just ordinary ground soil. In addition to that, it's a limited amount of space for that worm to live during the summer. And if your container is even smaller, such as a 1-gallon container or pot, as the soil dries out, that worm has nowhere to go and becomes dried out itself and it dies. In addition, the worms in the garden, in your raised beds, when it does rain, the worms will go deeper to get away from the moisture. In a container, when you water or it rains, that worm or worms have no additional place to go except for in the container, so they can drown in the container as well. Especially if you're in a self-watering container where the soil moisture consistent is level, it's always moist. Worms like to have a fluctuation where they can get away from excessive moisture in the soil. So yet, it may be a good idea to add worms to a container. Something of this size or smaller would not be something that would be wise to do. Now, if you're in a pop-up raised bed that is several dozen square feet, or perhaps the half of a wine barrel, that may be something that you may want to consider possibly adding earthworms to that, because there'd be enough space for those worms to travel in times that it may be too moist or maybe too dry in the soil. Thanks for watching. Join us again next time for more organic gardening and food preserving. I'm Joy Barrett, and this has been the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener.
For more information, please visit thewwisconsinvegetablegardener.com.